of 26 to 28% lower emissions by 2030. How will it actually get there? Now, it's still working on its policy. Whether to have a clean energy target or not, we'll learn by the end of the year. We're told exactly what that policy will mean. But the Australia Institute, a progressive think tank, has been doing some number crunching on this, and it reckons to achieve that target, we are going to need a lot more renewable energy in the mix than, well, either major party is talking about. Ben Oaquist is the head of the Australia Institute and joins me now. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon, Ben. Now, we've got this 26 to 28% target, that's locked in. Your report says, on the government's latest projections, we're going to need to have a further, 842 to 1,200 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent taken out of the market. What is the best way to do that, to achieve this sort of emissions reduction that the government has committed us to?
Well, let's go back one step, David. Thanks for having me on. But the 26 to 28% is regarded as a low figure, and most people think if Australia is going to do its fair share of reaching that 1.5 to 2 degrees that we signed up to in Paris, Australia is going to have to do more than that. But setting aside that for one moment and looking at what the government has agreed to, that 26 to 28% target, we've gone back and looked at modelling that's been commissioned by the government, the Climate Change Authority. We've looked at some independent modelling by Reputex, modelling that was done at the time of the carbon price introduction, and looked at what that modelling has found. And in essence it's this, is that the electricity sector, which makes up about 35% of Australia's emissions, has always been found to have to do more when we're meeting our emissions reduction targets than just a proportional share of 26 to 28%. And that's because the electricity sector can make emissions cuts more easily than other sectors. It's cheaper, in essence, to get reductions from the electricity sector than from, say, transport.
Ben, because I want to show a chart from your report today. If we can bring that up, and it goes to what contributes to our overall emissions. Here it is. It's the pie chart there, and as you say, you've got electricity emissions account for, 35% there. Then you can see the other sectors and how they contribute. So fuel contributions in transport, cars, trucks and so on, you can see they're around 18%. Manufacturing and construction, you've got agriculture making up about 13%. So there are a whole bunch of sectors where we can reduce emissions. But your point here, and I know you've looked at a number of approaches, is that the cheapest way for the overall economy to lower emissions is through the electricity sector. Why is that?
Well, largely it's because the technology is already there and mature. But it's also that we've measured the level of emissions coming out of the electricity sector for a long time. We're confident of those emissions. It's also because there's a smaller number of players. There's a known quantity of generators in the electricity sector, whereas, say, in agriculture, you've probably got 130,000 businesses. So actually, probably this modelling is conservative. How do you get farmers to lower emissions as a uniform thing? It'd be a pretty, blunt instrument, I would imagine, that would be required there. Well, exactly, and it's technically and politically more difficult to do it in those sectors that is in the electricity sector.
With vehicle emissions.
Indeed, and transport, of course, is likely to be going electric, so that electricity sector is likely to be more important. Now, the electricity sector is not everything, but it's the biggest sector. And I agree with the Prime Minister here on one thing. You do need to be guided by the economics and engineering. And in a sense, that's what this report has done. It's looked into not our modelling, but modelling done by a range of government agencies, a range of independent operators, and by the government and Treasury itself.
So then we get to what you found. If the electricity sector is going to share the burden here, arguably more than just an even split between all these sectors of agriculture, transport and so on, if the electricity sector is going to do a whole lot more than the others, for the reasons you've explained, what will it need to do?
Well, and it needs to do more because it's the cheapest place to do it. If we want to have the least cost approach to the economy, you're going to have to do it there. And we're rightly focused on the energy sector at the moment. And what this modelling shows that if you were reaching a 26 to 28% target, you'd effectively have renewable penetration of somewhere between 66 and 75% by 2030. Now, we've got two choices here. That's under a clean energy target. We've got two choices here: to listen to that economics and engineering, or find the emissions reductions from elsewhere in the economy.
But hang on, doesn't Alan Finkel, the chief scientist, say in his report we could have 42% mix of renewables in the market and achieve our Paris target?
But it's exactly the point, David. The Finkel report says let's have 26 to 28% in the electricity sector because that's our Paris target. But he says at least, and he doesn't consider outside the electricity sector what will need to be done and whether outside the electricity sector we can do that proportional 26 to 28%. That's of course why you need to look at the economy overall to work out how much you need to do from each sector, and that wasn't Finkel's job. He just looked at what taking 26 to 28% out of the electricity sector.
You're
and the reality
saying
is
here, Ben Oakwist, that Alan Finkel, I'm not blaming him here, but he has ignored the reality that getting big emissions reductions in farming, in vehicle transport and so on would be a lot more expensive and a lot more politically difficult.
Exactly. His report was contained to the electricity sector. It wasn't looking at all the sectors economy-wide. That's why previous modelling has come up with deeper emissions cuts from the electricity sector than proportionally for the whole economy, because it's cheaper, it's faster, it's more doable. The good news, of course, is that with renewables in price coming down, renewables driving to the market are actually lowering prices and are likely to do that more in the future. And the technology is maturing, and with storage, demand management, a smarter grid, and means we can do it while maintaining grid reliability and in fact having a better, more reliable grid that reduces emissions, is cheaper for consumers and responds more quickly than those old coal-fired power stations were able to.
Well, the one problem they have, of course, renewables, is that reliability. Now, I know with battery storage developing, great, pumped hydro, maybe that'll over time give that sort of storage ability. But right now, there is a problem there. If we had 66% renewables in the mix, as you've suggested we might need, we could have a lot of blackouts.
No, I don't think so. And indeed, there's been a misunderstanding of what that AEMO report was about. That AEMO report was what they produced from time to time, showing where the trends are going, where the shortfalls will be. And really, it's about this. We've got an ageing coal-fired fleet. It's retiring. What do we replace it with? How does the new grid adapt to the new technology? How can we use demand management and demand response better that makes emissions drop and saves money for consumers? Because in essence, Australia doesn't have a base load problem. We've got a peak load problem. And demand response, renewables with battery storage can actually be a better equipped to deal with those peaks than ageing coal-fired power stations like Liddell, that of course, remember, Liddell failed to be at full operation when it was most needed on February 10 when we had those blackouts. So there's been many reports to suggest we can...
smelter. Ben, we are going to have to...
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to have to wrap
just
it up.
in summary,
Yep.
Just in summary, David, with good planning and a smart grid and demand response, we can easily get to much higher levels of renewable penetration in a way that's better for our economy overall.
Ben Oakwist from the Australia Institute, thank you very much for that. Let's turn to